Are you looking to sharpen your budgeting skills? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Budget Couple Podcast, where we talk about life, family, and how to afford it. And now, the budget couple themselves, Nate and Danielle.
Welcome to the Budget Couple Podcast. I'm Nate.
And I'm Danielle.
And in this episode, we're going to respond to a listener question. Now, this listener has actually written in before, and we've responded in a previous episode, which will be linked in the show notes. But before we dive into this episode, we'd really like you to review our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast, as well as giving us any questions that you have related to budgeting. This show really is going to start to thrive on being able to answer your questions, and we really appreciate any support you can give us in either reviews or in asking us questions about budget. So let's dive into this and get started.
So first off, we're going to start by reading her email and just letting you guys know where she's at and what some of her numbers are and what some of her questions are. As my graduation is quickly approaching in May, congratulations, my husband and I will finally have a more permanent income, and our budget will become more stable and easier to track. My goal for us is to tackle the two big debts we have, a car loan and student loans. Master's and bachelor's degrees cost me a total of $40,000 in student loans. Our only car loan is a total of $40,000, equaling a whopping total of $80,000. There's worse out there, I'm sure. My question is, since I will be starting my career in a few short months and my income will be exponentially higher, would it be wise or not wise to consider buying a home with so much debt? Would we even be approved? We're moving to Sacramento, which is a much, much more affordable area in California, and we're mentally, emotionally ready to buy a home. I've been told I should pay off my student loans before considering buying a house, but I feel like it's really throwing money away just paying for rent at an apartment. So what are our thoughts? That's a lot there.
There is a lot there. And we cut down a couple things just for time's sake, but as a general recap, there's $40,000 in student loan debt, $40,000 in car debt, so a total of $80,000. And their current plan is to try to pay that off in 2 to 3 years, which is fantastic. Really happy about that. Just breaking down those basic numbers, that means you're going to be putting between $2,200 and $3,500 a month onto the debt, and that's not accounting for any interest or anything like that. So that's just raw numbers, dividing them out by the number of months. So that's kind of where we're at in the general scope of things. Now, as far as affording a house, I looked up some basic research inside of Sacramento, and it told me that the median house value, or what they're selling for in Sacramento, is $317,000. Now, that works out to a mortgage of about $1,500 plus because you have to add taxes and insurance and other things. So $1,500–$1,600, somewhere around that is where we're going to need to be for the mortgage if we make something in the average.
I would actually add that it may be a bit higher than $1,500. Once you do have to think about the insurance. If you need private mortgage insurance, that'll add $100–$200 or so. I mean, our first mortgage ended up being over $2,000 initially, and it wasn't much over this price.
No, it wasn't. But at the same time, we also had an escrow where our taxes and everything were rolled into our mortgage payment so that we didn't have to worry about paying taxes. It just kind of automatically happened.
And that's typical.
Yeah. So there's things to be in there. So you're going to be looking at a little bit more than that. But just as a ballpark where I'm trying to get raw numbers here, that's kind of where my starting point was. And before we really dive in here, I want to go through a process of what we're doing, because I want to figure out how much house we can afford, what the average house is, and kind of what we need to make to be able to afford the average house. Now, you may be able to afford more or less. We don't know what your salary is or what it's going to be. So I'm basing everything off of the median house and what you need to make to be able to afford that median house. So I'm going to make a couple of assumptions, but hopefully through the process here, you can kind of figure out, put in your own numbers and get the answer that actually works for you. But I'm going to use some broad assumptions to kind of answer this question. So again, with a mortgage of around $1,500 or so, you're probably looking a little less than a $317,000 house. But that's okay. For baseline stuff, that's where we're going to start off with. That means your take-home pay every month needs to be around $5,000 or $6,000 to generally sit inside of the ranges that we talk about, where we really discuss kind of 25 to maybe up to a third of your income, but that's on the high end of things. If you can keep it around a quarter of your take-home pay, your mortgage payment, you're going to be in great shape. And if you're bringing home that much money a month, you're making somewhere in the neighborhood of $80,000 to $95,000 a year. Does that all sound right, Danielle?
I think so. Yeah, it's so roughly 80 to 95. Again, that might not be your exact income. We don't know, but we're using these as just base numbers to help us get through this example.
Okay. The next thing that I want to do is I want to see how much money I have left after I add up my mortgage and my debts to see where I can go off and pay things. So if I take the $1,500 a month for mortgage and the $2,200 to pay this whole thing off in 3 years, that gives me $3,700 a month going towards debt and house. And it's going to be $5,000 a month if I'm going off to pay it all off in 2 years, which is a substantial sum of money. A large portion of your income is going to be going to these two things.
Yeah, that's so $3,700, and we're assuming here that you're making somewhere around $5,000 or $6,000 a month. You're not leaving a huge cushion for yourself for other things. You'll have gas for your car, you'll have groceries, you'll have other bills, you'll have a lot, especially if you buy a house. There's a lot of kind of hidden costs that come up along the way, particularly in the first year. So leaving that buffer of only like $1,200 or so is going to be a little rough. It would be rough. And the 3 years paying it off in 2 years is not doable.
On the salaries we're assuming, because again, we're assuming $80,000 to $95,000. If you're making, let's say, $150,000 or your household's making $150,000, this completely changes the equation of what we're talking about. But we're assuming that your salary's in that range, and then that's going to influence what we're talking about. So take this all with a grain of salt, but that's where we're going. So I went in then to figure out how much debt I had, and assuming a couple of things. We looked at what the student loan would be. So $40,000 in student loan debt would roughly work out to be about $475 a month in student loan payments. And your car, $40,000 car, it's probably somewhere around $725 a month in a car payment. So you're looking at about $1,200 a year or $1,200 a month in debt, which the amount of debt you have and monthly payments on debt greatly influences what kind of house you can afford. But running those numbers through the mortgage calculator tells me that yes, you can afford a house, and yes, you're going to get approved, and you're probably going to get approved for a whole lot more than what I'm going to ask you to spend or advise you to spend, because mortgages, they don't keep that rule of the 25 to 33. I've seen them as high as 60% in some calculators that is okay to spend, and that's just not something I would ever recommend to anybody. So that's kind of where we're going. Looking at all that, so I threw a whole bunch of numbers at you very quickly, assuming monthly incomes, house, all that stuff. If those numbers work out or are roughly correct, on an $80,000 income, you can afford a $220,000 house. On a $90,000 income, you can afford a $280,000 house. And then if you're making $100,000, you can afford roughly a $330,000 house. So again, you're going to get approved for a whole lot more than that. But if your numbers are in the realm of what we're talking about, don't go above this. This is your first house out of college. If you're really heart set on a house, that's fine. But just make sure that you don't overspend and don't get attached to something, because that's the worst mistake you can make when you're looking at a house.
And again, this is all assuming numbers. So the $100,000 income allowing you $330,000 house is assuming that you're paying $1,200 toward these loans. This is not assuming you will be paying, or it's not taking into account you also paying those loans off in a quicker amount of time, like 2 to 3 years. So you'll have to think about that in your equation. This is the base, like this is just what your payments would be as is, not any extra you're putting towards those payments.
And on a completely different note, the $40,000 in car is terrifying to me. Me personally, $40,000 for one car is a lot of money. I would actually consider trading down cars and kind of rolling the price of what I might have lost or been underwater into a new car or into a small loan, just so that I could get rid of the car, because a $40,000 car is a lot of money, especially when you're trying to afford a house or something. If my numbers are anywhere near correct of about $700 a month, $725 a month in a car payment, that's crazy town as far as hurting you in affording a bigger or better house.
Yeah, that was one of the first things that popped out to me too. Now, granted, neither one of us are big car people, so I do understand some people are much more into it. But when you're in the situation where you have debt and you're looking to buy a house, it might be worth considering wanting to sell that car and just downsize to something maybe in the $20,000 range. That would give you some extra cash to potentially, well, at the very least, it gets your payments lower. Hopefully, it will also get you some extra cash to put towards a down payment or something.
Right, because if your car payment drops down to like, let's say $300 a month, that $80,000 buys much more than a $220,000 house if that's your income. So the numbers are very fluid depending on what your payments are. And if you can make those payments lower, then you're in good shape. Now, again, you're talking about being able to pay this off in 2 to 3 years. So you might really love that car and you might not want to get rid of it. And your numbers aren't completely out of whack that I would really be worried about that. Also going through our budgeting kind of stuff when we talked about budget ratios, a $40,000 car, assuming you have a $80,000 to $95,000 income, isn't out of the realm of correctness. It's still affordable. The problem becomes if you need to get another car, that's when things start getting a little bit more dangerous for you. And then we're going to move into the last part of your question where we talked about owning versus renting. Danielle and I rented for, I believe it was 5 or 6 years.
We did, but we also had a situation where we were moving quite a bit. So
right. Yeah.
That adds into it.
Yeah, we knew we were going to kind of be fluid, so we were looking at the idea of renting, and we did it, and we were happy renting. That wasn't a big deal. So I was just doing a couple of quick calculations, because you mentioned that it feels like renting is throwing money away. And I felt the same way for a very long time, and I'm going to sound kind of weird because we own a house now, but renting actually is cheaper than owning a house. I looked up the calculator and I'll put a link in the show notes, but there's a CNBC report that shows in California, it costs 63% more to own a home than it does to rent one in California. That's crazy. So you're not actually throwing money away because remember, with a home, you have a lot of repairs, you have liabilities, you have taxes that you have to pay on it. There's a lot of things that you have to take care of that you don't have to on a rental. Like if you have a tree fall on your roof or you need to get a new roof in general or a hot water heater goes, that's all on you if you own a house. Whereas if you rent, you don't have to worry about any of that. That's all taken care of for you. On the other side of things, when you're looking at buying a house, you do have a lot of benefits. You have tax benefits, you have stable monthly payments. And what I mean by that is if you're renting for, let's say, 5 years, your rent's probably going to go up every year. Whereas your mortgage doesn't do that. Once you have it locked in, you stay paying that unless you refinance, which means you're most likely going to pay less. So you have a stable monthly payment where it's not going to change. It's always going to be the same. And even if you make a ton more money, your mortgage doesn't change. It's wonderful. And then finally, you do build an investment. You're able to sell, which is really where people talk about, I feel like I'm throwing money away. Because you don't get anything tangible out of a rental other than a place to keep your stuff. And that's fine. I have no problem with a place keeping your stuff, but it is nice to have a place to invest. And if you want to sell it, to have some equity build up.
I'm more on the side of buying always. Yes, in the moment while you're living in it, renting is cheaper. Nate just went over all of the reasons for that. But in the long term, you are creating an investment when you buy a house. And theoretically, when you go to sell it, it will be giving you quite a bit of income. So there is benefit to buying a house, but you don't want to jump into that just as you wouldn't jump into any investment. You don't want to jump into it until you're ready for it, until you're not only emotionally ready, but also financially. So it's just something to think about when you kind of go back and forth between owning and renting. We also have a previous podcast that goes into this in a little bit more detail, and we'll post a link to that on
in the show notes. Yep.
Yeah.
And then really, in your situation, if any of our assumptions are anywhere near correct, so if our salaries are close or in a better circumstance, if your salaries are way above what we're talking about, you're in a great situation. But there's really no right or wrong answer here. You definitely will be approved for a mortgage. It's not going to be as high as what your salary generally will say it is just because you have debt and you're working on getting that off, which is great. The best plan is to paying off your debt as quickly as possible, which it sounds like you guys are really ready to do. And then you can go through. Renting allows you to be a little bit more fluid of a lifestyle. You can sign a year lease, a 6-month lease, or a monthly lease. And kind of, if you don't like the area or you decide that you want to do something else, you can just pack up and move, and you don't really have any ties to an area. Whereas a house gives you a little bit more security. You know your stable monthly income, and you kind of sit down and go to the same place and kind of make it your own, which is cool. I really like that feeling. I love our house, and I love being able to do stuff with it. But I also loved renting for a lot of different reasons as well. So it's really fluid, and you just really want to make sure you make a smart decision. Don't get married to a house. Don't fall in love with a house, because there's always going to be another house. But if you get locked into a 30-year decision, which is what a mortgage is, it could be a bad decision. You don't want to get locked into a bad decision. If you make a bad rental, it's not a big deal. You can get out of it in a year or so.
So putting all of this together, just everything, the calculations we went through, reading your email, thinking over this from our own perspectives as well and our own experiences, we agreed that we would probably decide to rent for about a year, possibly more. But given that you're moving, it sounds like you're moving to a different area. You don't know what the real estate is like there. You probably don't know all about the school systems. You don't know about what areas are best and that sort of thing. So a year gives you a chance to get to know the area and figure out, what area you'd like to buy the house in and make a really good choice with that. It also gives you a chance to let your income and your budget kind of stabilize. I know you're graduating in May. Again, congratulations. But if I don't know if you have a job already lined up or if you are just assuming that, you'll be getting one and that your income will be going up. But either way, even if you have one lined up, I would want to wait personally a few months into it, see what my take-home pay is going to be after everything, work on my budget with that new income, and figure out what makes sense for your budget, for buying or renting. That year of renting will give you some time to just work through things and also figure out how you want to tackle this debt. And it gives you time to pay it off too. So I would say go for a year, sign a year lease, and then figure out from there whether you want to continue renting or whether you want to start moving towards buying.
Yeah, I absolutely 100% agree, especially because when you have your first job out of college, you're going to be making, as you said, exponentially more money than what you had before. And understanding what to do with that, how to use it, and kind of where it's going to go takes a little bit of time, because when you make a whole bunch more money and you're not used to it, it's hard to kind of direct it in the proper places because it's very easy to spend. It's very hard to make. So I would, again, recommend renting for a year. Even if your heart's set on a house, the house will be there. It's not going to go anywhere. It's kind of built into the ground. So it will be there. They're not going anywhere. And I know you and your husband said you guys are emotionally and mentally ready to go on this. I would just let yourselves get emotionally and mentally prepared for about a year of renting, and then you can kind of go and get everything set up, because that year is going to add a lot more clarity to your decision-making process.
And I'll add, too, that one option is to rent a home. Maybe not an apartment or condo. Maybe you rent a home, and that allows you to be in a neighborhood and see how you feel, and it allows you to have that house feel rather than, or without buying it. So it just gives you kind of the best of both worlds. Now, that might cost you a bit more, but maybe it's worth it to you to have that for that year or two or however long. So that is also one option. And you can spend your time searching on Zillow and really thinking through what you want your house to look like. Absolutely.
We still personally spend lots of time on Zillow for no good reason, just looking at things in our area, even though we have no intentions to move. It's fun. But I think that's going to wrap up this episode. Hopefully we're able to answer your question. And if anybody's listening out there that has a question or something similar or something totally different, please let us know. We'd love to help you with your budgeting questions. And you can always contact us at budgetcouple.com, on Twitter at AskBudgetCouple. And then show notes for this episode can be found at budgetcouple.com/episode 27. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Budget Couple Podcast with your hosts, Nate and Danielle. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit budgetcouple.com. Make sure to check out the next episode of the Budget Couple Podcast, where we'll talk more about life, family, and how to afford it. We'll catch you next time.